Somewhere in America right now, there is a man who got away with murder. Not once, not twice, but at least 5 confirmed kills and possibly 37. He sent coded messages to the police. He taunted detectives in the newspapers. He called into live radio shows and laughed at the people trying to catch him. He threatened to blow up school buses full of children. And then he just stopped. No arrest, no confession, no explanation. He simply vanished like smoke into the California night. His name? We still don't know. His face? Never confirmed. His location right now? Could be your city, could be your street. For over 50 years, the FBI, the SFPD, the Vallejo police, private investigators, journalists, and literally millions of amateur detectives around the world have tried to crack this case. Every single one of them failed. This is the story of the Zodiac Killer. The most chilling, most baffling, most haunting, unsolved serial killer case in American history. And I promise you, by the time this video is over, you will understand exactly why this case still keeps investigators awake at 3 in the morning. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't go outside alone tonight.
The night everything changed. December 20th, 1968. Lake Herman Road, Vallejo, California. It was the Friday before Christmas, 1968. America was in chaos. The Vietnam War was grinding men into dust. Martin Luther King had been assassinated just 8 months earlier. Robert Kennedy, gone too. The country felt like it was splitting apart at the seams. But in Vallejo, California, a quiet, working-class town about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco, none of that felt real on this particular Friday night. Here, it was cold, clear, and peaceful. Christmas lights glittered in the windows of small ranch houses, families gathered around their television sets, and teenagers, as teenagers always do, found their way to the dark edges of town. David Faraday was 17 years old. He was a wrestler, an Eagle Scout, an honor student, the kind of kid every parent hoped their son would be. He had a quiet confidence about him, not arrogant, just solid, grounded, the kind of boy who opened doors for people and meant it. Tonight, David had a first date. Her name was Betty Lou Jensen. She was 16, with dark hair, bright eyes, and a laugh that people said was contagious. She lived just a few streets over from David. They went to the same school. They had been circling each other for weeks, that careful, nervous orbit of 2 teenagers figuring out if they liked each other as much as they thought they did. They did. That evening, David picked Betty Lou up in his mother's station wagon. They drove around for a while, stopping in at a friend's house, keeping things casual. First dates are like that. You don't want to make it too much of a thing, because if it goes wrong, you want to be able to pretend it was barely a thing at all. But it was going well, really well. Sometime after 10 o'clock, David pulled the station wagon down a dark stretch of road called Lake Herman Road. It was a place teenagers knew about, a quiet, unpaved turnout near a water pumping station, about a mile from the Berryessa-Vallejo highway. You could park there and look at the stars. You could talk without anyone bothering you. David parked the car. He and Betty Lou sat together in the darkness, talking. Maybe they held hands, maybe they laughed. We'll never know, because no one who was watching them that night was willing to come forward, and the only other person there left no witnesses. At approximately 11 p.m., a car slowed down on Lake Herman Road and stopped near David's station wagon. Inside that car was a man with a gun. What happened next took only seconds. The gunman shot David Faraday once in the head at close range while he was still in the car. Betty Lou scrambled out of the passenger door and ran, desperately, frantically, down the road into the dark. She made it about 30 feet. The gunman shot her 5 times in the back. She fell in the dirt and did not get up. At 11:14 p.m., a woman named Stella Borges was driving along Lake Herman Road when her headlights swept across two bodies lying near a station wagon. She screamed. She drove to the nearest police call box and reported what she had seen. Officers arrived minutes later. David Faraday was still barely alive when they found him. He died shortly after at the hospital. Betty Lou Jensen was already gone. The investigators who arrived on the scene that night knew immediately that this was no accident, no robbery, no crime of passion between people who knew each other. This was something else, something cold, something calculated. There were no shell casings to be found. The killer had used a semi-automatic .22 caliber pistol and been careful. There were tire tracks, but the road was unpaved and they couldn't be matched with certainty. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses who could describe the vehicle clearly. The police had almost nothing. The case went cold within weeks. Detectives moved on to other cases. The families of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were left with grief and silence. For 7 months, Vallejo tried to forget, but the killer hadn't forgotten. He was just getting started. Blue Rock Springs, July 4th, 1969, Vallejo, California. 7 months passed. America celebrated its Independence Day. Families grilled in their backyards. Fireworks exploded over every city and small town. Kids stayed up late. Young couples drove to quiet spots to watch the sky light up. Darlene Farron was 22 years old. She was a waitress at a local restaurant, a mother to a young daughter, vivacious and social, the kind of person who knew everyone in town and made every room feel a little brighter. She had recently separated from her husband. Life was complicated, but Darlene had a way of moving through complications with grace. That night, she was with Michael Mago, a 19-year-old friend. They drove out to Blue Rock Springs Park, another popular teenage parking spot in Vallejo, about 4 miles from Lake Herman Road. It was past midnight when they pulled in. The fireworks were done. The park was quiet. A few other cars were scattered around the lot, other couples doing what couples do on warm summer nights. A car pulled up alongside them. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The car just sat there. Then it left. Michael and Darlene exhaled, and then the car came back. The driver parked, got out, and walked towards them with a powerful flashlight. Michael assumed it was a police officer, maybe someone checking the park for curfew violations. He started reaching for his ID. The man didn't say a word. He raised a gun and shot them both through the window. Darlene Farron was hit multiple times. Michael Mago was shot in the neck, face, and body. The gunman walked back to his car, paused, then turned around and walked back to the two bodies and fired into them again at close range. Then he got in his car and drove away. Michael Mago somehow was still alive. He would survive, though the road to recovery would be long and brutal. He was able to give investigators a description of the shooter, a white male, heavyset, with brown hair, about 5 feet 8 tall. Darlene Farron died at the hospital. She left behind a daughter. At 12:40 a.m., within an hour of the shooting, the Vallejo Police Department received a call. A man's voice, low, calm, almost monotone, like someone reading off a grocery list. "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." Last year. He was claiming the Lake Herman Road murders, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. The police operator kept him on the line as long as she could, but he hung up before they could trace the call. They found the call box he had used, a public phone just a few blocks from the police station itself. Brazen, arrogant, deliberate. This wasn't a random killer. This wasn't someone acting out of rage, of desperation. This was someone who planned, someone who wanted to be known.
someone who was just beginning. The letters begin. August 1st, 1969, San Francisco Bay Area. On the 1st of August, 1969, less than a month after the Blue Rock Springs attack, 3 letters arrived simultaneously at 3 different Bay Area newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each letter was nearly identical. Each claimed responsibility for the 2 double attacks, and each letter contained 1/3 of a strange, elaborate cipher. The sender demanded that each newspaper print their portion of the cipher on the front page. If they refused, the writer warned, he would cruise around and kill a dozen people that weekend. Now the newspapers were in a bind. Giving in to a killer's demands felt wrong, but if the threat was real and they didn't comply and people died, could they live with that? They published the ciphers. Each letter also contained the following sign-off: no name, just a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, like a gun sight, like a crosshair, the symbol of the Zodiac. The combined cipher, 408 symbols long, was a dense, interlocking grid of letters, numbers, and strange symbols that looked like something between a military code and a child's secret language. Cryptographers at the FBI and Navy looked at it. Academics puzzled at it. It was cracked, not by professionals, but by a high school teacher. Donald Hardin, a teacher from Salinas, California, and his wife Betty sat down at their kitchen table and worked at the cipher for 20 hours straight. They noticed patterns. They guessed that the killer was probably narcissistic enough to start the cipher with the word I. They worked backward from there. When the cipher finally broke open, what it revealed was disturbing. Not in the way a manifesto or a ransom note is disturbing. It was disturbing because of what it revealed about the mind behind it. The killer wasn't killing for money, wasn't killing for revenge, wasn't killing because of some psychotic break. He was killing for a cosmic reason. The decrypted cipher read, in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." Slaves for the afterlife. Let that sink in for a moment. This man believed, or claimed to believe, that the people he murdered would serve him eternally after his own death. Every victim was not a tragedy to him. Every victim was an acquisition, a piece of property for a future he imagined for himself beyond the grave. The end of the cipher contained a series of 18 symbols that were never decoded. To this day, those 18 symbols remain unsolved. Some investigators believe they contain the killer's name or identity. Others think they were intentionally unsolvable. One final taunt. 10 days after the first letters arrived, a 4th letter came to the San Francisco Examiner. This one began, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." It was the first time he used that name. He was naming himself, branding himself, creating a mythology around his crimes, and he was only getting started. Lake Berryessa. September 27, 1969, Napa County, California. The letters had made the Zodiac famous. His name was now in every newspaper in California. People were locking their doors at night, parking their cars differently, thinking twice about that quiet road they'd always used as a shortcut. The Zodiac thrived on this. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, a warm, beautiful Saturday, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were having a picnic on a grassy peninsula jutting into Lake Berryessa, about 30 miles north of Napa. Brian was 20 years old. Cecilia was 22. They were college students, bright, cheerful, genuinely happy people. It was one of those golden California afternoons that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. At around 6:30 p.m., they noticed a man standing at the tree line watching them. He was wearing something strange, a dark hood. It covered his entire head and hung down over his shoulders like a medieval executioner's mask. On the front of the hood was a white cross in a circle, the Zodiac symbol. The man walked toward them deliberately, without rushing. He had a gun. He told them, calmly, almost politely, that he was an escaped convict from a prison in Montana. He needed money and their car. He said he wasn't going to hurt them. He was lying. He made Cecilia tie Brian up with pre-cut lengths of rope he had brought with him. Then he tied Cecilia himself, pulling the knots tighter. Brian tried to stay calm. He told the man he could take the car, take whatever he wanted. The man thanked him politely, and then he pulled out a knife. He stabbed Brian 6 times in the back. Then he turned to Cecilia and stabbed her 10 times with a horrible, methodical thoroughness. He left them both for dead. Brian Hartnell, bleeding from 6 stab wounds, managed to crawl to a nearby road. A fisherman found them. An emergency helicopter airlifted Cecilia to the hospital. She died 2 days later. Brian Hartnell survived. He would spend decades trying to make sense of that afternoon. In interviews years later, he described the killer's voice as calm, almost conversational, like a man discussing a minor inconvenience rather than committing murder. Before leaving the scene, the Zodiac had done something extra, something no other killer had done. He walked to Brian's car and used a felt-tip pen to write on the door. He wrote the dates and locations of his previous attacks, and he wrote the time of this one, September 27th, 69, 6:30. He was keeping score, publicly, permanently. At 7:40 p.m., the Napa Police Department received a call from a payphone near downtown Napa. A male voice said simply, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Gia." Then he put the phone down without hanging up, leaving it dangling. Officers who responded to that phone booth found something chilling. On the handset, they could detect a partial palm print. It would not match anyone in the existing criminal database, but it was the closest thing to a physical clue investigators had yet. A cab driver named Paul. San Francisco, October 11th, 1969, a Saturday night. Paul Stine was 29 years old and working as a cab driver while studying for a graduate degree. He was saving money. He had plans. He was the kind of person who had a future mapped out in his head and was quietly, steadily working towards it. That night, he picked up a fare in Union Square. The passenger was a white male, stocky, with brown hair and glasses. He directed the passenger to drive to Washington and Maple Streets in the Presidio Hefts neighborhood. When the cab arrived, the passenger shot Paul Stine once in the right side of the head with a 9mm pistol. Then he took Paul's wallet, his keys, and, for reasons that would become important later, tore a piece of Paul's shirt from the body. He began wiping down surfaces in the cab. But here was the thing the Zodiac hadn't planned for. Teenagers. 3 teenagers in a house directly across the street from where the cab had stopped were looking out their second-floor window. They saw the whole thing. They called police. The first officer to respond was driving right past the intersection when the dispatch came in. The description given over the radio was a black male adult, which was likely a miscommunication or error in the original report. The officer drove past a white, stocky man walking calmly on the street, heading into the Presidio Park. He didn't stop him. It was the Zodiac. 2 officers responded minutes later and entered the Presidio on foot, searching the park with flashlights. They may have been within a few hundred yards of the killer. They never found him. The teenagers across the street were able to give a detailed description to police sketch artists. The resulting composite would become one of the most famous images in American true crime history. A heavyweight white male, clean-cut, wearing glasses, with short brown hair. For the first time, the public had a face to fear, even if it wasn't quite the right face. Investigators confirmed the Paul Stine murder was the Zodiac's when 2 weeks later they received a letter containing a piece of Paul Stine's blood-stained shirt. The letter was addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle. It began, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He mocked the police. He mocked the officers who had walked right past him in the dark. He described the teenagers who had watched from the window and told police he had tried to do them in by coming back to the street while officers were searching, but there was too much foot traffic, so he changed his mind. Then he included a cipher. This one was shorter, 340 characters. He called it a name cipher, suggesting it might contain his identity. It took 51 years to solve. In December 2020, a team of amateur code breakers calling themselves the 340 Cipher Team finally cracked it. The decoded message read, in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." No name, no location, just more taunting, more mythology, more darkness. The letters keep coming. Late 1969 through 1970. After the Paul Stine murder, something changed. The physical attacks, as far as investigators could confirm, appeared to stop. No more bodies were found that could be definitively linked to the Zodiac, but the letters kept coming, letter after letter throughout late 1969 and into 1970, all postmarked from the San Francisco Bay Area. And with each letter, the Zodiac's claims grew wilder, his threats grew more specific, his contempt for police grew more open. On October 13, 1969, just 2 days after the Stine murder, he sent a letter to prominent criminal defense attorney Melvin Belli. Belli was a celebrity lawyer, famous for defending controversial clients. The Zodiac wrote to him as if he might be able to help him, as if he was looking for someone to talk.
Most serial killers have a type, a gender, a demographic, a certain kind of victim they seek out. The Zodiac killed couples, single men, and young women. He killed in cars, on grass by a lake, in the middle of a city. He killed with guns and with knives. There was no reliable pattern that would help you protect yourself from him. You couldn't say, "I'm safe because I'm not his type." You couldn't say, "I'm safe because I'm not in the right neighborhood." You were never safe, anywhere. That's what made the Bay Area lose its mind. And that, criminal psychologists have suggested, was entirely intentional. Chapter 9. The Suspects. 5 decades of suspects and theories. Over the past 50-plus years, hundreds of people have been named as suspects in the Zodiac case. Family members have accused family members. Former neighbors have pointed fingers. True crime researchers have built entire careers on single suspects. The DNA age opened up new possibilities. If investigators could match Zodiac's DNA from envelope glue or stamp adhesive to a suspect, the case could potentially be closed once and for all. But every time investigators have gotten close, something falls apart. Let me walk you through the most significant suspects, the ones that have had serious investigators genuinely convinced at one point or another that they had their man. Suspect 1. Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen is, without question, the most famous Zodiac suspect. He was named publicly by Robert Graysmith in the best-selling 1986 book Zodiac, the same book that became the basis for David Fincher's 2007 film. The circumstantial evidence against Allen was extraordinary, almost overwhelming at first glance. Allen was a convicted child molester who lived in Vallejo, exactly where the first murders occurred. He had told a friend in 1968 that he wanted to start hunting humans. He owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch with the crosshair symbol on it. He used typewriters to write letters and owned the same brand of ammunition used in the murders. He had been fired from a school just before the school bus threats began. When police searched his trailer in 1991, they found rubber boots with synthetic material on the soles, and the Lake Berryessa attacker had left partial boot prints near the scene. The SFPD took Arthur Lee Allen seriously for decades. But every hard piece of evidence let them down. A handwriting analysis comparing Allen's writing to the Zodiac letters came back negative. The writing was not a match. When DNA profiling became available and investigators extracted a DNA profile from the stamps on several Zodiac letters, it did not match Arthur Lee Allen. Fingerprints from the cab where Paul Stine was murdered, partial prints that had been painstakingly collected, were compared to Allen's. Not a match. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992 of a heart attack. He was never charged. And the DNA evidence, if accurate, suggests he was not the Zodiac. Though some researchers dispute the reliability of the DNA sample, noting that it could have been contaminated or could have belonged to a postal worker who handled the letters. The Allen debate continues to this day. Suspect 2. Lawrence Kane. Lawrence Kane, sometimes spelled Kane, was a somewhat overlooked suspect for years until researcher Blaine Blaine and others brought him back into public discussion. Kane had suffered a brain injury in a car accident that some researchers believe may have affected his behavior and impulse control. He had connections to several areas where the Zodiac operated, and in a remarkable coincidence, or something more, he lived on the same street as Darlene Farron, the victim from Blue Rock Springs. Darlene's sister Linda Del Bueno spent years insisting that she recognized Kane from encounters Darlene had described, of men who seemed to know Darlene and who frightened her. Darlene had allegedly told friends before her death that a man from her past was watching her. Kane's handwriting analysis results were more ambiguous than Allen's. Some analysts said it was inconsistent, others said certain characteristics were similar. Kane died in 2010. No charges were ever brought. Suspect 3. Richard Gaikowski. Richard Gaikowski was a journalist who worked in the San Francisco Bay Area during the Zodiac's active period. He was named as a suspect largely based on voice analysis. A researcher named Blaine named him after comparing recordings of the Zodiac's phone calls, the Blue Rock Springs call and the Berryessa call, with recordings of Gaikowski. Gaikowski had also worked on an underground film project that involved themes eerily parallel to the Zodiac's crimes. He died in 2004, and without living suspects, building a legal case is essentially impossible. His supporters point to voice analysis, geographic connections, and documentary research. His detractors point out that voice analysis was not a reliable forensic science in the 1960s, and still isn't in 2024. Suspect 4. The 2021 Cold Case Investigation Group Theory, Gary Francis Post. In October 2021, a team of 40 amateur investigators, calling themselves the Case Breakers, publicly claimed they had identified the Zodiac Killer as a man named Gary Francis Post, a former Air Force officer and house painter from Groveland, California, who died in 2018. The group claimed they had found a set of photos from Post's personal darkroom that showed a man with distinctive facial scars matching those visible in a composite sketch of the Zodiac. They claimed to have found Post's name hidden in the Zodiac ciphers. They also linked him to an unsolved murder in Southern California that they believe was a Zodiac crime. The announcement made international news. The FBI and SFPD, however, were not convinced. Both agencies reviewed the case-breaker's evidence and declined to declare the case solved. The cipher analysis in particular was widely criticized by professional cryptographers as a case of pareidolia, finding patterns that aren't actually there because you want them to find them. The Post theory remains controversial, and the case remains officially open. Chapter 10. The Silence, 1971 and beyond, when the letters stopped. After the furious period of 1969 and 1970, the Zodiac's letters became less frequent. Then they became rare. Then they stopped almost entirely. The last confirmed Zodiac letter was received in 1974. After that, silence. This is the part of the story that keeps investigators and researchers up at night. What happened? Why did he stop? There are several possibilities. The first, and most hopeful, he was incarcerated for another crime. Many serial killers maintain their compulsion throughout their lives, but if someone is in prison, they can't strike again. If the Zodiac was arrested for something unrelated, a burglary, an assault, even another murder, the wooden killings would have stopped without a resolution to the case. Police have cross-referenced the Zodiac's activity timeline against major incarcerations in California, but no clean match has ever been established. The other possibility is he died. He could have been killed in a car accident, died of illness, been murdered himself. The Zodiac was likely between 25 and 40 during the active period, which would put him somewhere between 60 and 80 years old if alive today. The third possibility, the darkest one, he stopped because he wanted to. He achieved what he set out to achieve. He had collected his slaves. He had frightened a city. He had humiliated law enforcement. He had become famous. And now he could simply live the rest of his life in ordinariness, knowing what he had done and never being caught. The idea that this man could have been living a normal life, going to the grocery store, watching the news coverage of his own crimes, reading the books written about him, watching the movie. It's almost unbearable to contemplate, but it is entirely possible. In 1978, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle that many experts believe was genuinely from the Zodiac. It was the first communication in 4 years. It read, "I am back with you." Then nothing again. The silence has held ever since. Chapter 11. The Families. The Human Cost of an Unsolved Case. I want to pause here and take a moment for something that gets lost in the true crime coverage of this case. The victims. Not as names on a list, not as data points in a timeline, but as people, as human beings who existed before this monster took them, who had lives and families and futures. David Fairday wanted to go to college. Betty Lou Jensen just started dating. Darlene Farron had a daughter who grew up without her mother. Paul Stine was working his way towards a graduate degree. Cecilia Shepard was 22 years old and had her whole life ahead of her. The confirmed victims left behind parents, siblings, children, friends, people who spent the rest of their lives in the strange grief of an unsolved murder. Not just mourning a person they loved, but carrying the weight of not knowing, not having justice, not having closure. Brian Hartnell, who survived the Lake Berryessa attack, has been interviewed many times over the years. He has spoken about the long shadow the attack cast over his life, the way it shaped his decisions, the way that afternoon would come back to him without warning decades later in ordinary moments. He became a lawyer. He built a life. He was resilient in a way that is genuinely admirable. But the wound never fully healed.
That's where we're stopping today. In Part 2, we're going deep into the most controversial suspects the world doesn't know about.
We're breaking down the cryptographic evidence that's emerged in the last 3 years. We're looking at a jaw-dropping new theory that has serious investigators reconsidering everything. And I'm going to share something that hasn't been widely discussed, a detail in the Zodiac's final known letter that might change the way you understand this entire case. If this video got under your skin, if you feel that cold thing sitting in your chest right now, you know what to do. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell me, who do you think the Zodiac was? I'll see you in part 2. Sleep well.